First, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So to my left is Nada, and the far end, Marc Breitman. Nada Breitman Yakov, Marc Breitman are the 2016 Driehaus laureates. Together they form Breitman and Breitman, a Paris-based architecture and urbanism firm known for its work improving cities through quality architecture and urbanism. And you will hear a lot more about and from Marc and Nada later. And then in the center, Daniel Parolek and Karen Parolek. They are founders of Opticos, a Berkeley, California-based team of urban designers and architects who believe in the transformative power of beautiful, sustainable, walkable communities for all. Dan is the driving force behind the movement of for missing middle housing, which we're going to talk about. It's a term he coined in 2010. And Karen's efforts redesigning zoning codes for cities in the U.S. and abroad have helped to revolutionize the way we regulate land development to reinforce more walkable, sustainable places. So let's welcome our panel once more. So I'm going to start with a question for Marc and Nada. One of the most amazing places that we saw as we were filming was this mining region of northern France where you have done so much work. Mining ended there in the early 2000s. The area now has suffered from as much as 50% unemployment. And by the way, you'll see a bit of that in this film that we're going to show you in a few minutes. You have tried to revitalize this region, these entire towns with new contextual neighborhoods. And over again, when we were interviewing you, you kept talking about the mayor of the town. The mayor of this town saw your work, the mayor of the town. And also in the Paris suburb of Plessis-Robinson, again, the mayor of the town commissioned you. So, you know, this, as an American, was kind of amazing to me that mayors seem to have the budget and the power in France to commission architecture, which seems entirely different from the way we do things in this country. Can you talk about how does that work, your relationship with these mayors, and how does a mayor have the power to transform a town?
Well, you know, in France, the administration is quite strong, and the mayor is giving the authorization to build.
And the budget?
No. The budget is done by the developers, or private or public. So, but the decision about architecture can be in the hands of the mayor if he is involved in the construction and in architecture. They are not all like that. But some of them, yes, and we have the chance to meet at the Plessis-Robinson, Philippe Hemzek. You know that he was really involved of the traditional city, and he changed completely the landscape of his city, because when he came, it was in '89, mayor of the city, he found a city with just blocks and how you say bars. I don't really don't
like
say
these houses, the blocks. Yeah,
the
they were like
blocks.
buried. You'll actually see a clip of this.
And no, not such. It was just one street going to the city hall, which is the old village, and after it was only school and equipment and those bars, and in front of the city house it was a big ground for football.
Soccer field, yeah.
Soccer.
So where, I'll bring Marc in here, so where does the funding come from? Where does the money come from? The mayor has a great role in deciding what it looks like, but where does the money come from?
The mayor don't have money, but he must have a vision. There is a few mayors in France who have an urban vision. Philippe Hemzek is one.
Yeah.
He has done, so as Nada said, he found an ugly city. Well, it was not a city, it was a social area where only poor people was living on horrible buildings, and he decided, because he has his vision, to make a heart of a new city. And so he obliged the promoters, and how do you say it?
Promoters, yeah, developers
to choose architects who were able to draw architecture who looks like architecture, and who are able to make a street a square or something like a traditional city. But he has no money. He has the power of the idea,
So the
which is sometimes more than money.
So the developer is the one who brings the budget, brings the money?
The promoter.
Except if it's public equipment.
Right, and so in this case, in Plessis Robinson and also in northern France, it's extensively social housing.
Yeah.
So this is the federal government or
No, the social housing has their own developers company where they, how you say, manage the money, public and some part of private. Sometimes it depends. But they are acting as developers. But for the local equipment, for example, a school or you say small public equipment like that, it's in the hands of the mayor, yes, in the public money.
So one of the things that makes the work of Marc and Nada different, I think, than some of the past Driehaus laureates who we have featured is so much of your work is social housing, what we would call public housing or subsidized housing in this country. How unusual, bring the Paroleks in here, Parolek, got it. How unusual in this country is it to see social housing in a traditional vocabulary as opposed to a modernist vocabulary? Are we ahead there over Europe?
I would say it's over the course of the last 15 to 20 years, in large part to the new urbanist efforts. The vernacular traditional architecture and traditional town planning has been introduced into public housing, as we call it, and has had a tremendous impact on the design of it.
Is traditional better for public housing? That's open to any of you.
I think urbanism is better for public housing. I think creating great places is the key for everyone. We need to be creating cities and towns and neighborhoods, and the modernist tradition has not proven very successful at that.
With the segregation of type and isolation.
Right, with the segregation of the different economic strata of society, with the segregation of different uses. I mean, just separating residential. Michael mentioned our dependence on the car in the United States, the segregation of residential from commercial uses. All of those, we've stratified our society in our cities in more ways than we can count.
And what I would say is a large part of our conversation with missing middle housing is about not public subsidized housing, it's about delivering affordability by design.
Okay, so you use this term missing middle, and I want to introduce that term. It's a term that you apparently coined. Are we right about that? What do you mean when you say the missing middle?
Yeah, so and this really caught on when we created a diagram. So we have all these systems in the United States, construction industries, financing, planning, that are set up on this paradigm that you have single-family detached houses, and on the other end of the spectrum you have multifamily housing. It might be ground floor retail with housing above, but throughout the history of American cities prior to World War II, we had this vibrant mix of duplexes and fourplexes and courtyard housing that created very vibrant, diverse neighborhoods and provided diverse housing choices at a lot of different cost spectrums as well as different qualities of life. And so the missing middle is that spectrum of housing that we have forgotten how to deliver between single-family houses and the larger apartment buildings.
Now, I spent a lot of my life on the north side of Chicago, Lincoln Square neighborhood. It's exactly as you described. So where is it missing? Where in America is this middle missing? I think it's in places all over Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, as I mentioned, almost every neighborhood built prior to the 40s has a good mix of this, even on the West Coast. I would say we have much less of it.
Even on the West Coast.
As you move further west, much younger cities, there's a lot less of it. But why it's missing is that over the course of the last 60 to 70 years, we've just built very, very little of it because of these systems put in place that don't even identify it. I was looking at American Housing Survey that 45% of all rental units across the United States are buildings under 20 units. They're the missing middle. And only less than 10% of them have been built in the last 40 years. So they existed historically as part of vibrant urban places. We forgot how to deliver them.
So part of what you talk about with this missing middle is what Marc and Nada, what you talked about. We had the amazing experience of visiting you where you live, which is this neighborhood called Saint-Germain-des-Prés in Paris. It's 6th arrondissement. You walk out of your office, you go about 30 seconds and you're at the Seine and there's Notre Dame Cathedral. But you talk a lot, Marc, you use the term in our film of mixité, which I guess we would translate into this mix and diversity. What is it about you? And obviously you go there and you get it immediately, but what is your life like in a place like that? What does that mean, mixité?
Mixity, it means that you mix different population. For example, when we build in the park, there is people for private housing and people who are living in the social housing. And then you mix activities because in the Athens Charter, I would say, they divide the functions and where to live, where to work, where to have leisure, and those different suburbs were
and you have to get in
connected with cars and things like that. Well, mixity is to mix everything and to make a noble neighbor or suburb or district, I don't know how you say. And so you don't make a ghetto or condominium or things like that, no. You try to mix a different population and different activities.
And you walked us around your neighborhood. Describe the different places where you actually, your office is split up throughout the neighborhood, as is your home and your bar that you go to, right?
When Geoffrey came to Paris, he was at the beginning more interested in French croissant, baguette, wine, and in fact, near our office, we have a guy who sells croissant. There is a lot of bars where you can have on a terrace a glass of wine, and you can choose the color. That's mixity. And there is even people who don't live in my area who comes in my area. I never go in suburbs, but they come in my area.
Right.
That's mixity too.
Yeah.
The city is a perfect example of mixity. Even in the architecture, for the people, for the activities, against function and monofunction and what you know about zoning.
But this is a dilemma in the missing middle conversation and in what Michael alluded to with diminishing resources and things that are transitioning in cities. When I was in Paris, I visited a college friend of mine who, when we graduated college in 1978, he moved a block away from where Marc and Nada live, in a little garret, upstairs. But now he couldn't afford to live there. Right? Does this happen where we price out the diversity?
Well, it's a huge problem in the United States right now, for sure, because we have two generations now, the millennials and the baby boomers, that are both demanding walkable mixité. They want to live in places where they can walk to get a cup of coffee, where they can walk to go to school or to church. And we haven't been building those places in this country for the past 75 years. We stopped building them after World War II, even probably before, actually in the 1920s. And so the only places that still exist in this country like that were the cities that were built prior to that, and the neighborhoods, not just the cities, but the neighborhoods, the small towns like Dan grew up in, right? But there aren't that many of them. And so the demand, it's a simple supply and demand problem. We don't have enough supply, and we have huge demand in this country for people to live in that kind of lifestyle.
So you're alluding to the millennials and that generation.
Boomers. But the baby boomers also.
And the boomers.
The
millennials don't want to own a car, right?
That's right. The millennials don't want to own a car, and most of the boomers probably shouldn't own a car. So maybe not yet. Maybe it's the generation before the boomers. But the boomers are seeing their parents aging, and they're the ones that are having to take the keys away from their parents and realizing what a struggle this was for the World War II generation. Having the independence, American independence, is key to our identity. And that car has been critical to their independence. And so taking the keys away from their parents has been, it is a generational struggle because that isolates them. It leaves them out of society because the neighborhoods that they live in, it means they can't go see anywhere. They can't go see anyone, they can't be part of society because they can't be in a car. And our city planning patterns and our architecture patterns have done that to these people. We've done that to them.
How can you build these places? I mean, is this the kind of thing, you have built whole towns in northern France, and we saw it in Plessis-Robinson outside of Paris. Can you, if you build it, will they come? If you build it today, I mean, it looks like a historic town, but do people use it in the way, do we even know? You said in our conversation, Dan, before we came on stage, that Americans don't know how to use public space.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you build it, will people in this country use it in the way we imagine?
I mean, I think it's really interesting because just culturally, there's something about the American culture where, as we were talking about this, that Europeans, whether you're in Italy or France or any other European country, people will populate the public spaces. I was in Barcelona this past summer, and in the Gracia neighborhood, and it was on a summer evening. It was packed with people sitting on the pavers, socializing, having a good time, and you rarely see that in the United States. So I think people are looking for that, but there's something about it, we've lost it in our culture of how to use that public space because there hasn't been a recent culture of providing that high quality public space within neighborhoods as well as within town centers.
What about in France? We saw in a lot of those northern coal towns, you're creating public, these coal towns, we didn't know how to translate this term bar, right? In these coal towns, these housing blocks just, are relentless. And so one of the things you've done there, the old worker housing, small worker housing, is break them up.
Yeah.
Do you find the public is coming out and using these public spaces in these towns that you've created?
I hope so. Yeah. No, but you tell when we were walking together in Courrières, in the street, you said we don't have that in America. And I think that I answered to you, we don't have that neither in France. But here, yes. I mean, it's quite new also, the work we have done on the cities and making streets and places. And as you saw it, the people enjoy it, those places, they work out, they go to the place, they have market on the place, and no, it lives, but it's still not so often in the old cities, in the cities in France, to create urban spaces so specific.
Mm-hmm. Do you find, Marc, that, well, for example, in Plessis-Robinson, outside of Paris, you've created, or in the town on the Royal Road, Chaville. You created the town center. There's this charming moment in the documentary where they were commissioned to make a town center in this town called Chaville. So they went to look at Chaville, and they went down the road, and Nada says, we got to Chaville, and all of a sudden we were out of Chaville. We must have missed something. So they turned around and they go back, and same thing. They went out the other. Where's the center? There was no center. So what did you do in Chaville, and how successful has it been?
What did I do? We drew a square, because it was a town. It was not a town, it was a road going from Paris to Versailles, where there is a castle. And this was not a town. And there was, along the road, the Mayer House. Mayer House?
City Hall.
City Hall. And in front of the city hall, ugly college built with metal. Well, it seems nothing. So the mayor decided to make there a new square, and we drew the new square. And because of the scale of the space, because of the commercial space who are downstairs, because of the vocabulary we use, trying to make what we call in France parcellaire. How do you say parcellaire?
Well, sort of individual.
Sequences.
You take the big building and you break down the mass into individual facades.
Sequences.
But the better is to come and see. I will offer you croissant, and we go there. And you will see it's a normal square where everybody can feel in a good scale space. Mm-hmm. So we didn't do something extraordinary. We just apply the urban rules of the
existing urban rules.
French cities, yes. Mm-hmm. With a new vocabulary, with social housing, with private housing. We were speaking about mixity. You have to imagine that in 1997 or maybe 98, in France, it was impossible to build social housing and private housing in the same block, because the rich don't want to live with the poor. I say it in a very bad way, but it is more or less reality. And the first one who accepted that was Pemzec. He said, okay, you can put also social housing there. So we have done blocks who are half social, half private.
Right.
This is really mixity.
He's referring to Philippe Pemezec, who's the mayor of Plessis-Robinson, who you'll see. And one of the things you see in our film is, and that you show us everywhere, is you know, that one's social housing, that one's market rate, you know, and they look the same, right? That's part of your philosophy?
Yes.
That they're indistinguishable.
You cannot show where is the house, social houses and private houses. You cannot see it from the outside. They are the same houses.
So here's a controversial angle on that, if you want to apply that in the US.
The integration is through architecture.
What's that?
The integration passed through the architecture.
Yes, but can we do that in the US? Are we doing that successfully in the US? And inevitably, in the US, does that bring race into the question?
Oh, that's interesting. I think we can do it in the U.S. I think it's actually interesting you brought up the idea of scale and breaking down the massing of the building into more acceptable pieces. I think, you know, when we've looked at mixing public and private housing in large buildings, right, the conversation now has become, okay, well, we'll agree to have some subsidized housing in our building, but we're going to have a separate entrance for those people. Right? Because the rich people don't want to go in the same entrance as the poor people, right? That's not helping anybody.
And is that code? I mean, sorry to like really focus on this, but is that code for the
absolutely
the people of color who don't want to go in the same entrance as
absolutely, and you know, and
or actually the other way around.
Exactly, and and speaking of code, I could go on for hours about that and the use of the word character. I mean, for those of you that don't know in the United States. We now, in our work in cities and counties across the country, have to be very careful about using the word character, because for the last 100 years in the United States, character has been code for nice white people villages, right? And we want to preserve our character, so we're going to zone it as a detached single-family neighborhood so that we can protect the character of our neighborhood, which basically means we don't want the black people moving in, right? That makes it very difficult to have a conversation about the values of traditionalism and classicism and modernism when you can't use the word character, because now we're talking about the character of buildings, but I can't use the word character because in many communities across the country, especially impoverished communities or in particularly impoverished communities of color, the word character is a code word for you don't want us there. And so, sorry, I had to put that in there because it's actually become very challenging to have a conversation about beautiful architecture without using the word character, and I'm actually quite challenged by it to this day. So all of this is very inherent in the conversation and how we build communities. And I think scale has something to do with it. If we build buildings that are smaller in scale, it actually helps us get around that, because we can actually have multiple buildings in an area that each building has its own purpose. And you could have a beautiful, very elegant townhouse for someone that can afford it, right? And next door, that same 4-story building could have 4 or 8 units in it, right? And a lot of the work that we've done with the missing middle housing has actually shown there's a beautiful 4-square building in Houston, and there's 2 right next door to each other, beautiful brick buildings, 2.5 stories. And one of them, it looks like it could be a detached single-family house, like a beautiful house for a wealthy resident in Houston, right? So it could be a house for a wealthy family that's just one family living in that house. But it actually has 4 units in it. So there's 4 families in living one, and the one right next door has 8 families living in it. But the building from the outside looks exactly the same. And so now when people are talking about, well, I want walkable neighborhood to live in, I think people generally are interested in living in mixed communities. I think they're generally interested in rebuilding community and rebuilding conversation. I think the politics in our country is a direct result of the failure of the architecture and planning profession in our country, the way that we have separated communities so that we no longer encounter people that are different from us. And we no longer understand the struggles that they're going through. We're all going through struggles, no matter who it is. We all have challenges in our life, but we're not seeing that. And so we don't understand people's experiences, and so I think people are interested in learning that, and the way that we build our communities fosters that, and has not fostered it, and can foster it if we are paying attention to what we're doing.
What I would, to build upon what Karen just said, is that the mixing of housing types in new neighborhoods or mixing into existing neighborhoods in the United States is really constrained by a 100-plus-year-old zoning system that is an out-of-date operating system. And so a large percentage of our work and our colleagues' work is rethinking the way we regulate our built environment, and we want to remove the barriers and encourage the mixing. But the zoning is a big barrier, and we were part of a nonprofit called the Form-Based Code Institute that was created about 14 years ago, and with some support from Richard, once again, thank you, Richard, we're able to spread that conversation and education about the need for removing those barriers for the mix of the housing types.
I'd actually like to just add one little point. We actually found recently, there's a new book out called The Color of Law, and it talks about the history of redlining in the United States. Michael mentioned the destruction of urban renewal in our country, the destruction of the freeways that have been put across our lower, our poorer neighborhoods. These neighborhoods have had immense destruction wreaked on them because of our city planning policies. But this one talks about the history of redlining and our national financing policy, and the reality of the fact that families of color were not able to get financing to purchase a home, and therefore they have not been able to build generational wealth because they've not been able to own property in this country. And so they are generations behind in the opportunity to build wealth in our country because of the history of redlining. Well, in researching and hearing about this, it turns out that I think it was President Harding, was that who it was? Was it President Harding that they mentioned? Actually used the word multifamily as another code word for character, as a way to keep the colored people out of the white neighborhoods. So he actually started promoting zoning that separated multifamily from single family. And if you look at any zoning code in the country, you will see there are single family neighborhoods and there are multifamily neighborhoods. And it turns out that multifamily and separating those zones was used by President Harding, encouraged by President Harding. He went out and said, go write a zoning code for your town and put a multifamily zone in your town. And so that began this separation, right, in our communities.
So, as we all know, France, unlike America, is a utopia where there is no racism. You have encountered a similar challenge. Very early in your career, you were advocating for a neighborhood near Montmartre, Goutte d'Or, which was North African, the place where North Africans were living. They did the same urban renewal there, right? You were fighting to restore the historic fabric of the neighborhood. It was bulldozed. But flash forward many, many, many years, you've built this mosque in Amsterdam. It was not, you had to deal with some issues of the community. There was a challenge, right? You said in the film it took you 15 years. But it happened, right? Can you tell us a little of that story?
20 years, yes. Marc was more involved of this first decreation.
Go ahead, Marc.
Come on.
Well, as you know, and that may be the reason why we are here, we are architects. So they asked us to make a mosque, but they could ask me to make a church, and it was a fantastic project, built a mosque now.
And
Geoffrey, I did not understand the relationship between the Arabic who were living in La Goutte d'Or and Amsterdam. What was your idea?
Well, was some of the opposition racism? And if it was, how was that resolved successfully in Amsterdam?
Michael Likudis, I've done a beautiful speech about this project 10 minutes ago, and I heard him, and I thought that I would like to go to see this project because it seems a very good project. He explained in a fantastic way the idea we had, because we were in a very strange area. In the beginning of the 20s, Amsterdam a new development. So there was an architect who was named Berlag who made a very huge expansion, very interesting one. And on the place where we have to make the mosque, it was a piece of Amsterdam school architecture. But I'm repeating what Michael said, so maybe it's not so interesting. The result is that we have to fight with everybody because of the architecture, classicism. And at the end, it means 1 year ago, Nada, or the newspaper said in Amsterdam, after fighting with all the modernist architects, what did they say?
They find it, not, how you get it?
Normally she said it better than me.
Irrésistible.
Irresistible.
Why this place is so irresistible? So, in a way, they all agree with what happened there.
So you found a way to kind of, well, there were so many moves there. I mean, one was creating not just a mosque, but a new public square for Amsterdam with social housing around it, right?
The idea was...
There is a part private also.
Yes.
The idea was to, when they asked us to think about this place, we had in front of us a fantastic guy whose name Frans Beidendijk. And I had secret meetings in Holland with the Turkish people, the mayor of Amsterdam, because the mayor of Amsterdam has to negotiate with the Turkish, but they don't want the city knows that they are negotiating. The mayor was obliged to make a project here by the Turkish because the Turkish was the owner of the seat. In Amsterdam, as maybe you know, nobody is owner of the site, of the ground, except in certain parts.
This is, just so to explain, because parts of the town that were never submerged,
yes,
you can own. Parts of the town where it's been filled because it was submerged, the city owns, right? And then you can lease it, but you can't own. But they owned it. They owned the site because it used to be an island. So they could own it. They had a garage on the site.
And they were praying in a very huge garage. Garage station? Cars?
Yeah, garage.
So this is not possible. If you want to make people aggressive, you put them underground in a garage. So when they asked us to think about what we could do there, we proposed to make a square and to put in the middle of the square it means in the middle of the city, to offer to the city of Amsterdam a new square on which everybody could see the mosque. It was a way to give the possibility to the people to get the citizen of the city, to be citizen of the city. Is it a good term for that?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So we have done, you don't harm me, that's a problem. So we have done a square, and it's worked quite well, because everybody cross, and even Amsterdam people comes to see the mosque, which is so funny, because in our period it's quite difficult to be a Muslim.
Yeah.
And it's very funny to see that in Amsterdam people on the Sunday want to make a little promenade and they go and see the mosque.
No, but they caused the most, Sophia, but they caused a Western mosque in Amsterdam beside the Oostkerk in the old city. Mm-hmm. It's too poor. It's one of the name of the mosque and the way of consider the.
So this is, I think, an example of what Michael was talking about in his introductory remarks. The cities are becoming more diverse. I've got this quote from what Michael said, not only economically, but in many cultures living together. And how does architecture help mediate what Michael said between the new and the old, the rich and the poor, and the many cultures coming together? So can architecture do that?
I think that buildings that are designed and urban places that are designed to be adaptable can absolutely do that. Any great urban place is continually evolving to the different cultures that are influencing moving out of the community. So I think absolutely. I think just a really thoughtful buildings and thoughtful urbanism can be the framework for an adaptable place that accommodates and changes over time. And I think a part of, once again, a part of what the challenge here in the U.S. is cities they're not able to evolve to meet those changes in ways that are necessary. And so part of it is just thinking about ways to enable the cities to evolve. Enable a 5,000 square foot mansion that's in a row house form to become 8 units, and that can be affordable to a variety of different people and can add diversity to a neighborhood. Enable a ground floor space that existed as a coffee shop to be able to change into a retail space without allowing an extra 20 cars because it's a change of use. I mean, just really obscure, mundane regulations that prohibit that in the United States.
And then to lob a softball into this conversation, where's the role of tradition and traditional vocabulary in that? Is tradition inherently more adaptable, flexible? I'm not sure I buy that argument, but that's an argument that's made. Do you feel that that's true?
I think buildings that are built to last are more flexible because they're going to last longer and you're going to have more invested in them to continue to use them and adapt them over time. Mm-hmm. I think, to me, the value of traditional architecture and vernacular architecture is more that it relates to us as humans. It's designed proportionally to us as humans. And even the early modernists, as Michael taught me in school, were trained as classicists. They were trained around proportion to humans and to us, how we relate to the buildings and how the buildings relate to us. And I think, but more recent modern buildings don't do that so well, and they don't relate to us. They don't give us anything to relate to. We don't enjoy being in their company, and that changes our willingness to be in those spaces and our willingness to be out in community with other people. And I think that's, back to your other question around, can architecture change this? Architecture can change this by creating places that people want to be together. You know, and that means it means walking to work and walking to school. It means, you know, being willing to take public transit sometimes or not. I mean, the wonderful people that can afford to live and work and go to get their croissant within a block of one another are lucky. I am lucky in that I only live 2 miles from where I work, so I bike my children to school in the morning. My daughter takes the public bus to school, and then we bike to work. You know, so we're fortunate. But then other people who can't live at quite as close can still walk to the transit station and then take the train to the next town over where they can have a job. And then all of us are using those public spaces together. We're all encountering each other in our day-to-day life, as opposed to walking into the garage that's still closed in and climbing into a car and pulling up in front of our building or into the parking garage in our building and climbing out and only encountering the people that we work with and live with every day. And so actually creating not just cities, but even small towns, you know, small towns like the small towns. We have a wonderful tradition of small towns in our country where people can live and work and play together in spaces together is what actually will change that.
Well, as happens every year, this conversation just flies by, and it's always so. I always wish we had more time. On behalf of Chicago, Marc and Nada, I want to apologize for the croissants at breakfast. We tried.
No, it was perfect.
My dear, you have donuts and cream.
We have donuts. Let's give them a hand.